I've been talking about movies for a very long time now, so let's switch things up a little bit and let's talk about a video game series that I really enjoy. It's about the end of the world, which is a weirdly relevant topic at this point in time. And that's the Fallout series by Bethesda. Well, starting from the third one, it's by Bethesda. And I'm here to compare between three games. Of course, it's just my opinion. It's not an objective statement about which game is better than the other. It's just which one I like the most. Fallout 3 versus New Vegas versus Fallout 4. All three of these games were developed by Bethesda. For people who don't know, Fallout 1 and 2 was not developed by Bethesda. It was by another company. So these three games are published by Bethesda, although Fallout New Vegas was developed by Obsidian. So, there's like 4 different companies working on different Fallout games at any given moment. It's very confusing. Let's not get into it. Let's start with the map design, because in a Fallout game, you're going to traverse a lot of different environments, and it is very important that it's an interesting place to explore, because exploration is a huge part of the game. And unfortunately, I think Fallout 3 is the worst in this aspect, because Fallout 3 has a map that is just really, if it feels like it's blocked off in a lot of different parts. It doesn't feel like it's coherent, because there's a lot of parts in the game where you would meet like a roadblock and then you don't really know which direction to go, and you're gonna meet a lot of roadblocks when you play Fallout 3. The map really isn't as interconnected as I would have hoped it would be. Maybe it's a way to encourage the players to use more of the metro station, because Fallout 3 has a lot of metro stations and you're going to be dungeon crawling half the time you're playing the game and just going on these underground railroads. But I just don't think it's that much fun that I always have to go underground, and yeah, I just like it more if it's interconnected and it's on the surface. In terms of Fallout New Vegas, I think that game has fantastic map design. I really enjoy the vastness of the map. It feels really open and it feels like you can go anywhere you want. And it's pretty easy to go wherever you want to, because as long as you follow the road, I think you can get to a lot of places without actually needing to search up the internet. And it's actually pretty easy to access a lot of different locations, so I really like that about New Vegas. But at the same time, there's a certain vastness about the landscape. There's a lot of really big fields and a lot of big lands, and it can offer some pretty good combat opportunities as well. Now Fallout 4 also has a pretty good map. I don't think I like it as much as Fallout New Vegas, because while it has more locations to explore, it's definitely a much bigger map as well, but I don't think it has that vastness. It doesn't feel like a very big world, because it just doesn't feel that way. Maybe it's because everything feels very deliberate, everything feels very calculated, everything is just placed there on purpose, and that's why it doesn't feel that same way. So I'm gonna give it to Fallout New Vegas. I think Fallout New Vegas has the best map design. Now in terms of the RPG elements, I think that Fallout New Vegas is definitely the best. There's no question about this. Fallout New Vegas has so many interesting RPG elements, a lot of choices and a lot of consequences and a lot of freedom. And I think it's like the only game where you could choose not to join any factions at all, and you can just like create your own faction pretty much, just standing your own ground and not following anyone else, which is a very interesting idea that is unfortunately only in Fallout New Vegas. I haven't played the first 2 Fallout games, so I wouldn't know, but compared to Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, New Vegas is the only one that has the RPG elements. And it also has a lot of stats, a lot of skills, and you're gonna create a character that isn't like anyone else. It's a very personalized game, and I think there's a lot of freedom in terms of customizing your character and the dialogue options, as well as just the story of the game. It offers you a lot of freedom. Now, the worst thing about Fallout 4 by far is the RPG elements, which I think that Bethesda just watered down because they want to appeal to the beginners or the newcomers, whatever you want to call it. I mean, they're just treating the newcomers like idiots at this point. I mean, I think that they should not have removed the RPG elements. Instead, maybe they should find a way to teach it to new players instead of just removing it altogether, because it's kind of idiotic actually. And it does lead to some really stupid moments in the game where it feels like your choices don't matter, because no matter what, you just go back to this one fixed path, which is a very bad feeling. You don't want to give the player the feeling that the player doesn't actually have any free will. Now, to be fair, there's no single game that actually offers players free will, but most of them do give the players at least an illusion of free will. While in Fallout 4 there's no illusion at all, it's just right in your face. You have no free will, just follow our path. And that's what I hate about Fallout 4. And you don't really get to control certain stuff like barter skills or some of the more specific skills. In Fallout 4 they were not removed, but they were grouped together, so you don't really get as much control over your character because a lot of these stats all get grouped together and they get simplified really severely, and it really hurts the Fallout experience. Maybe not so much for a new player, but for experienced players and RPG fans, they would immediately tell like this is a terrible RPG. Fallout 3, I think, does actually a pretty good job because I think it just carries over a lot of stuff that's from the first and the second game, and it may not be as refined as the RPG elements in Fallout New Vegas, but at least it's there, and I can't say the same for Fallout 4. In terms of the combat, I think that Fallout 4 has the best combat when it comes to first-person shooting. In games like New Vegas or Fallout 3, like a lot of the first-person shooting feels like you're not actually in control. It still feels like it's up to the stats. It's up to the RPG, the numbers. It's all based on numbers, probabilities, and percentage. It's not actually based on your skill at that moment, which I think FPS fans are not gonna like that. So in terms of like first-person shooting, Fallout 4 definitely is the best. But Fallout 3 and New Vegas has really good wets. And for people who hasn't played any Fallout game before, what wets means is it's kind of like turn-based combat, but at the same time there's actually a timer counting down. So yeah, you pretty much it's like a turn-based combat, and you just choose which part of the body you want to attack, and then each part of the body has a certain percentage. And it's more strategic than like just pure first-person shooting. So if you like more of a turn-based type of combat where strategy is more important, then I think Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas might be the better choice. In terms of the main story, I don't think that Fallout 4 is really that good. Like a lot of people really like Fallout 4 story. I mean, it has its moments. But what people don't necessarily remember are all of those parts of the story that are not so interesting, that are scattered in between these good moments. So for every good moment you have a long extended period of time where nothing interesting actually happens. And that's kind of the problem with Fallout 4. When it's good, but it has some really bad pacing. Whereas I think Fallout 3, while the story does not offer you as much freedom, the story this time I think it's really actually really good. The story in Fallout 3 is actually really good, and it's a very well written and it's a very well thought out story. I think they were very careful when they were like crafting the story of Fallout 3, and it's a very compelling story as well. So I'm gonna go with Fallout 3. In terms of New Vegas, I don't know if it's actually a story that appeals to people as much as it is the freedom of the game. But the thing is that there's kind of a dilemma. Like if the player is offered too much freedom, sometimes the story does take a hit, or at least the story takes a backseat. to the player's freedom. And I think that's kind of what's happening with Fallout New Vegas. I think it's a great game, definitely, but it definitely places more emphasis on freedom, and the story does suffer because of that. But in terms of the side quests and the world building, now this is where New Vegas is really, really good. New Vegas is really good at building lore and building lots of little stories all over the world that you can pick up and you can read about them. And so many different characters in New Vegas, all of their own backstories, they have their own history. It's really interesting to learn about the world and its characters, especially in Fallout New Vegas. Now the thing with Fallout 3 is, I mean, it's kind of infamous that Fallout 3 has lots of cut content. Lots of content that's supposed to be there, but it's cut out. And it's not just Fallout 3. Many this sort of Bethesda games actually have cut content. And the result is, I think that in terms of side quests and world building, Fallout 3 can feel a little bit empty, especially when compared to 4 or New Vegas. And yeah, it's just really empty, and sometimes I'm trying to find some lore, but I don't really get as much as I wanted to. And in terms of Fallout 4, it's definitely a case of quantity over quality, because Fallout 4 has a lot of pieces of dialogue or lore or a lot of reading materials to do, and it's gonna sound really interesting to fans of New Vegas, but the truth is that while it has a huge amount, in terms of the quality, it's really far away from New Vegas. It offers up lots of content, but the content itself doesn't necessarily carry the same amount of quality assurance that New Vegas has. Now, let's talk about the companions in these games. Fallout New Vegas, I think mainly due to the world building and due to the freedom of choice, the companions in that game are a lot more interesting, because those companions really have a great sense of personality to them. They have very colorful personalities, and they have lots of interesting backstories, and they even have their own side quests. And most of the time, their side quests are actually really interesting too. And I can't say the same for the other games, okay? Because the thing in Fallout 3 is there's barely any companions if you compare it to the later games. Again, it's a result of it being an early game, and it came before the others. That's why it doesn't have as much content. But still, if you want to put it in comparison, Fallout 3 just doesn't have that many companions to start with. Fallout 4 has many companions, but it's not as good as Fallout New Vegas, because the companions themselves, they don't have as much depth, and they don't have as much personality as the companions in Fallout New Vegas, I think. Like, even if they do have personality, there's not a lot of backstory or a lot of interesting side quests or anything that's attached to these characters, and really that's all they have. They have their personality and they have their perks. Let's talk about the radio, because when I play a game, actually I do kind of pay attention to the music, because I think it kind of makes or breaks the game in a game like Fallout 4, because that game involves a lot of walking around, and you're gonna have to have good music, otherwise walking around is gonna be just walking around, it's gonna be boring. And I think that Fallout 4 has the best music overall. Like, I really like they have started to incorporate some rock and roll songs as well, some more rhythm and bluesy songs. I really like those rockabilly songs, and they really give the game a more uplifting spirit, which, to be fair, I don't think that all Fallout fans do appreciate that. Some Fallout fans want their post-apocalyptic world to be dark and gritty, and the fact that there are rockabilly songs playing in the background makes the world seem colorful. But I kind of enjoy listening to the rockabilly songs, and sometimes it actually plays into the comedic sensibilities that Fallout always had. Fallout always had a very dark sense of humor, and I think that the soundtrack in Fallout 4 especially points that out. It also gives the game a great sense of fun as well. In Fallout New Vegas, you get songs that are, I think, slower, songs with more longing, songs that are more wistful. And for the most part, they actually work. They work with the Western theme of the game and the theme of revenge. Because Fallout New Vegas is kind of a darker game than I think the others. It's pretty dark at times. Not, I don't mean like the lighting and the visuals, I mean like the themes are very dark. That's why it makes sense for the music to take on a more serious and more melancholic tone. So it also makes sense, I think. Now, in terms of Fallout 3, the songs there are all still great. And Fallout 3 really set the foundation for a lot of the games that came after it, not just in terms of the radio, but in terms of everything else, the gameplay and the story and everything. However, I think that Fallout 3 once again is lacking in content, and the same thing goes to the music. You're gonna get really annoyed listening to the same pieces of music again and again and again and again, especially if you play the game for a very long time, which most people do since it's an RPG. People play RPGs for a very long time. And you're gonna listen to the same songs again and again, and it's gonna be annoying. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is the art direction. And I'm not talking about the graphics necessarily, but the art direction, which is their aesthetic, their vibe. And I think that Fallout 4 has my favorite aesthetic by far. Everything looks so colorful, and the colors really pop. Especially the color palette in the game is just fantastic. I really like the way the world looks. Fallout New Vegas looks really great as well, in a very different way, of course. It looks like a Western because it again ties into the theme of the game being like a Western revenge movie. And I really like the way that the orange and the yellows really find their way into the game. Fallout 3, however, just looks ugly. Like, there's no other way around it. It just looks totally ugly and just washed out. All of the colors look so muddy in the game, and the whole world just looks ugly, and and from a visual standpoint, I just don't think it works. But I understand that it's really part of a trend, because during that time, like the 2000s, a lot of game looks like that. I mean, GTA 4 also looks really dark and muddy and gritty because it's a product of its time. And looking back at it now, Fallout 3 just doesn't hold up as well visually. But overall though, I think that Fallout 4 is my favorite, personally, if I'm looking for a game that I want that focuses on exploration and first-person shooting and just those kind of stuff, I would go for Fallout 4. But if I'm playing an RPG, if I want to go for a very deep RPG with lots of freedom and choice and consequence, RPG that will immerse you in the world and blow you away, it has to be Fallout New Vegas, one of the best RPGs ever released. To this day, I'm still impressed by the freedom and the choice and consequence in that game, and the cause and effect and everything, and the scope of that game is just still really amazing to this day. But my favorite still goes to Fallout 4, just for the presentation alone. The experience of listening to the music and looking at the world before you, it's just a very unique experience to me.
Settle down where pretty girls are. Well, you know